welcome to Real Life and Archetypes. My name is Marina. So I wanted to do a coda of the Christian Craighead series just because in hindsight, there are things that I want to clarify and maybe mention some things that I haven't talked about. So let's just go through a few bullet points here. So in the interview, he begins with childhood and he talks about his early exposure to violence, and that affects the way that he relates to his surroundings, his environment. The violence he experienced was not at home, it was outside. So that's going to impact actually an archetype that has to do with your mind and your communication skills. So for him already, and how you navigate situations, how you circulate, any kind of environment. Now, this guy developed a warrior mindset before he became one, because he also talks about how he would go to places, so circulating and confronting people just because he knew he was small and skinny and he didn't want to be a victim anymore. So he would confront the environment. That's somebody who's going to develop a mind and a voice and an intelligence that is already related to confrontation, conquest, domination. So that is going to be very much present in the way that he's going to think and formulate thoughts. So the mindset and the development of his intelligence already connected to the hero archetype. Now, I have to say, most of the special forces guys that we see, the elite warriors that we see giving interviews, communicating, but these are people that are highly intelligent and they have to deal with a variety of situations, think very fast. And so they're not dummies. These are people who really have a capacity to use their mind in a very specific way, very quickly, to adapt to a lot of situations. They are very intelligent people. So it's interesting that already from childhood circumstances, this guy was ready to go and conquer his environment. For me, the thing that really impacted me the most about his interview, well, one of the things, is when he recounts an experience where he was being bullied, tortured, actually, when he was very young. I think he was about 8 years old. And he talks about how in his mind, he was glad it was him and not somebody else, especially a young girl, because these guys, he describes them as evil. So this kind of thinking is really a marker of the hero archetype, self-sacrifice, that's quite extraordinary at any age. But as a young child, you can see that this guy really had innate qualities of the warrior, of the hero, and also a moral compass in there, because to have that sense of sacrifice, this is very much of the hero archetype, by the way, the sacrifice. And a warrior like him, and especially in special forces, we're going to see. That's why it's so interesting to look at archetypes in this, guys, because we're going to see archetypes like really in black and white very clearly, and especially the hero, okay? That's right there. This is what they represent. So to have that aspect of self-sacrifice, and to me, I keep saying, why is that interview so particular for me? I don't know how I can explain it. There's something about this guy that I find that stands out. Now, standing out, that's another marker of the hero archetype. And I think it's because there's something about him that I believe more than others. And there's something more profound about what he talks about. There's some subtleties there that I find very interesting about his interview. But to have that marker of self-sacrifice, that to me is something that I find the most incredible to hear about his interview. So, talking about standing out, this thing that made him stand out from others and everything in his story stands out, that's another marker of the hero archetype. And this is what I was referring to when I kept saying there's something unique about him, something that sets you apart. This concept of separation is very important for the hero archetype. And he would mention, being different. And I would always say I prefer to use the word unique, and that also his grandmother, we're going to talk about that in a moment, could see that he was different. I would use the word unique. The reason is simply because I'm doing an archetypal exploration and I sort of put the words where they belong in each archetype. And the way that he talks about his experiences, the concept of being different is more, just to mention it very briefly, it's related to another archetype, and it's more about being weird, a little weird, okay? But for me, the things that he talked about in that interview, what he's talking about is being apart, setting himself apart from his environment where he was coming from. And his grandmother, well, I'll talk about it in a second. It's really about the potential and separation, which is important for the hero and the hero's journey and the hero's adventure, to be in circumstances that you're going to separate from, that ordinary world that you're going to leave, whether it's symbolically or in physical adventure. Those are this is the language that he was using, the experiences that he was referring to. It's all about separating yourself, standing out. And there's something about you that is, yes, it is different, but it's about being, having some potential. Okay. Talking about his grandmother, what I feel from what he talks about is that his grandmother was, an anchor to the archetype of the older self, the elder. She was the one who connected him to that figure of authority, and also all of the values of getting older. That archetype, to get older, is really to go towards higher levels of being, to achieving at higher levels. She imprinted that in him and also transmitted and taught him some values of respecting authority, which, as I mentioned in the series, is a huge advantage, because that is going to give him, again, another kind of intelligence, which is to pay attention to experience and the benefit of having long-term experience, which is what you get when you get older. Except that, you need to do the thinking, to look at the mistakes you make, the consequences of the passage of time, the benefit, the reward of thinking strategically, just to having this sense of this older self. It's about thinking long term. And then when you get older, you're going to need to restitute your experience in some form or another, whether it's officially or not. We all do that. We get older and we start telling people about what we know. It's completely natural. But he has a lot of that archetype, and he's anchored personally and emotionally. That's what it means, to that figure. And that is going to have a lot of impact as to how he relates to figures of authority and human systems, because this is where the family archetype, which he has through his background, biography, family, and his grandmother, he's got the authority archetype connected to that. So it's not going to be separated. It's going to be personal for him. Anything related to the older self. And he even said at the beginning of the interview that his grandmother is the person that he became, which is quite a strong statement. And also his grandmother, she saw his potential. So he receives, it's not just a caregiver. It's not just someone who was present for him that was family. She saw his potential. That's hero language. That's separation. Maybe she understood and knew that this boy had to leave this place, this environment, because he had potential. He had something unique. He had to separate himself. Okay, that's the hero's journey, the hero's adventure. Now, because his mother passed away when he was very young, that created a sense of abandonment. Okay. And I think because of that, this is really not complicated psychology. And his grandmother represented a figure of authority and someone who taught him to pay attention to that archetype. I think that, of course, everything related to being emotionally attached to other figures of authority are going to activate the sense of the need for loyalty, continuity. This is what the family archetype does, by the way. A family, think about a uterus carrying a child, okay, that needs to grow. And what a family needs to give you is a continuity. This is very important. That's why people who have issues related to childhood, they have difficulty developing because the process, the psychological function of continuity is sabotaged again and again because they never had a safe place to be long enough and to be able to develop something for long enough of a period of time. And again, as you can see, I'm talking about time. That's why family and the older self, which is about society, they are actually connected. Okay, family is supposed to give you the conditioning so that you can function in the real world. And so sabotage instead of continuity is a real thing. And he talks about abandonment syndrome. So where are you going to go in order to feel that you can be at home, therefore you can grow and develop? He's going to, he's conditioned to connect to figures of authority, systems that are going to give you the discipline to reach higher levels of being and all that kind of stuff. For him, it's personal. It's not just about achieving. It's really deeply ingrained. And that's why he has these issues, these situations about how after what he did, some people high up considered him a bad example. He feels that personally. It's not just about a few, schmucks saying some things. It is something that really impacts him emotionally. It's personal. One of the good things that his grandmother gave him was also respect for older ladies. He mentions, that she would tell him, help this older woman with her shopping bags and things like that. The things that his grandmother taught him was to help the weaker. And that's, this is about ingraining values in him. And that's something that when it's done when you're young, it never goes away. So to help the vulnerable, to help the weak, and also the female figures, that's quite an interesting part of his story because he mentions that from until the age of 7, there wasn't a man in the household. It was his mother, his aunt, and his grandmother. And the grandmother was present more than the others. So there's something about him that also sets him apart here. He is the only male figure in the home with all of these women. So developing this defender, protector kind of aspect in him, being with all these women probably played a huge part, and especially with this older woman reinforcing in him, there are people who are more vulnerable and you need to be there for them. he hasn't mentioned anything about that concept psychologically, about being the only male, which is kind of interesting. But I wonder about that because that's another thing that sets him apart here. He was the male, and especially in those days, modern times are different now. But this is someone who is from my generation, so that's why I'm speculating about a lot of things, because in those days, being the only boy with a few women there at home, I'm sure they put a lot of stock to the fact that he was a boy. That's, the kind of dynamics that happen in a household. You expect the male to be the strong one. So I don't know how those dynamics played out. He just mentioned his grandmother. He didn't want to go into other stuff, but I wonder about how those dynamics played out for him, because that might have put some kind of burden on him, perhaps. I don't know. I have no idea. But what is significant is that he was the only male for the first years of his life. And I mean, I suspect it has played some kind of role in his development. So, being the only male, masculine energy, that's the hero archetype. Okay, that's the masculine energy. We all have it. Boys, men have a lot more than girls. There's no discussion here. And generally speaking, that is very true. But this guy developed a lot of the masculine energy because of his background and identity. Is really about what the hero is about, because the hero is about discovering what you're made of, what you're capable of. And the more you push yourself, the more you're going to generate ideas about things you want to do that now you know you're capable of doing. That's going to get you closer and closer and closer to what you really, really want to do. Now, in his case, it's very clear from an early age how he had such a clear vision. He wanted to be in the military. But the hero archetype is all about identity, your body, your presence. I've talked about the power of presence. I'm not going to repeat myself, but pay attention to how all of these guys in special forces, they have tattoos all over themselves. So to have tattoos in your body, that is an expression and a marker of the hero archetype of wanting to have an identity. There's something about you that is new to the world and that needs to become who you really are. Okay, so if you have a lot of that energy, that's going to be even more of a concern to you. But to have the need, to make an impression, to have an identity, it's because there's a part of you that's going to need to separate, particularly from early conditions. And you can see a lot of people having that when they have a lot of conflict when they're children, or when they've experienced war, any kind of violence. The need to really have an identity is going to be felt even more intensely by these people, because they feel that they have to create their presence, their identity, like in a new world. But from the point of view of archetypes, that's what life is about for all of us. That there's a part of us that needs to be completely new, that we have to define ourselves and we have to carve our own path. That's what the hero's journey is all about. But warriors, they give us like the real examples that we can see so clearly. And a lot of them, they're going to tell you either they were in a lot of trouble when they were young. They don't necessarily all have terrible conditions when they were young. I don't know the stats on that, but the interviews I've seen, it's not necessarily that there's something wrong with their family, but they were, troublemakers. They had this energy at least, and a lot of them would go and fight because they have this energy of wanting, of needing to prove themselves and to have an identity that makes, an impression and an impact. And that's why they become this hero archetype, this warrior. It can manifest in many ways, but special forces, you can see that very clearly. And that's what matters. That's why I love exploring these guys and watching their interviews, because you can see very clearly what is going on here. But for normal people, we can see that in many ways. Maybe we need to make a statement of identity through the mind, through nurturing others. Yeah, the war of who cares more for others. That happens a lot. It can be in many ways. Okay, so this is about it. I just wanted to talk about a few points that I wanted to clarify, and I think I'm done with this interview. Who knows? I will probably talk more about it. I love this interview. Go watch it, and thank you for watching.